The haunting on the Amstel Star. Holly and James had been looking forward to their holiday for months. It had been a stressful year back in the UK, and the idea of a short getaway to Amsterdam felt like the perfect escape. When Holly stumbled across a quirky accommodation option, an old passenger ship moored along the River IJ that had been converted into a floating hotel, she couldn't resist. "It'll be fun," she said as they booked the trip. "Romantic and a bit different." James smiled, though he wasn't quite as convinced. He preferred solid ground beneath his feet, but Holly's excitement was infectious. The couple arrived in Amsterdam late in the afternoon. The canals shimmered under the setting sun. Bicycles whizzed past, and the air was filled with the mingled scents of stroopwafels, tulips, and something sweeter from the coffee shops. They dragged their suitcases down cobblestone streets until they reached the dock, where the Amstel Star waited. It was an impressive sight, a long white vessel with porthole windows and a broad deck. The sign claimed it had once ferried passengers across the North Sea before being retired and converted. Inside, the corridors smelled faintly of salt water and something older, stale wood and rust perhaps. The receptionist, a tall man with sunken eyes, greeted them with a thin smile. "You're in cabin 14, he said, sliding them a brass key. "It's quiet there." The way he hesitated on quiet made Holly glance at James, but she brushed it off. They found their room down a dimly lit hallway. The cabin was small but cozy, with a double bed, wooden paneling, and a narrow window looking out onto the darkening water. That night, they returned from dinner in the city and settled into bed. The ship creaked gently, rocking with the water. Holly was drifting towards sleep when knock, knock, knock echoed against their cabin door. She sat up. "Did you hear that?" James frowned, climbing out of bed. He opened the door to find an empty corridor stretching into shadows. No footsteps, no voices, just the faint hum of the ship's generator. "Probably some drunk guest," he muttered, shutting the door. But as soon as the lights went off, the knocking returned. Slow, deliberate. Knock, knock, knock. James opened the door again. Nothing. But the sound persisted, sometimes at the door, sometimes on the wall beside the bed, sometimes overhead as if footsteps were pacing above them. Sleep was nearly impossible. Around 3 in the morning, just as exhaustion was taking hold, Holly's eyes flew open. She had seen movement by the wall. A pale, translucent figure stepped through the wooden paneling as though it were smoke. It was a man in an old naval uniform, his face half hidden, features blurred like water-stained ink. His head tilted toward them and his mouth moved, though no sound came out. Then, just as silently as he appeared, he walked through the opposite wall and vanished. Holly clutched James's arm. "Did you see that?" James, pale and rigid, could only nod. The following day, they tried to laugh it off. "Maybe it was the wine," James suggested as they explored the canals, visited the Van Gogh Museum, and took pictures under the twinkling lights of the bridges. But neither of them was truly at ease, and by the time they returned to the ship, unease had settled in again. That night, the knocking returned, louder and more insistent. Sometimes it sounded like knuckles on the door, other times like fists pounding against metal. At one point, the bed itself seemed to tremble, vibrating with a steady rhythm. Then came the whispering. Words neither could quite catch, carried on a draft that smelled faintly of brine and decay. Holly swore she felt a cold hand brush her cheek in the dark. At 4 a.m., James snapped. He leapt from the bed, yanked the door open, and shouted into the corridor. "Stop it! Leave us alone." For a moment there was silence. Then down the hall a shadow flickered. A man-shaped silhouette moved against the wall before melting back into it. That was enough. By sunrise, they were already packed. Holly's hands shook as she zipped her suitcase. James didn't even wait for the receptionist. He dropped the key on the desk and muttered, "We're checking out." As they stepped off the gangway and onto the solid pavement of Amsterdam, relief washed over them. The city was waking up. Bicycles whirring past, bakery windows glowing warm with fresh bread. Normal life carried on, blissfully untouched by whatever lingered on the Amstel Star. They found a boutique hotel near Dam Square, with crisp sheets, bright windows, and no strange noises in the night. For the rest of the holiday, neither of them mentioned the ship. But whenever they passed the harbor, both Holly and James avoided looking too closely at the vessel moored quietly by the water, its portholes dark and watchful. And deep inside, they knew, some passengers never really leave.